Hi, I'm Ethan, and this is a 1 hour guide to the new UC prompts and others like it. I put the word prompts in here rather than essays because the UC directors at WACAC a few weeks ago emphasized that they really prefer that we as counselors, do not use the word essays. Now, we could go back and forth about what we think an essay is or means. I'm going to respect their choice, and but what I heard from Gary Clark at UCLA is he said, we think an essay is an academic piece of writing, and these are not academic pieces of writing. So that's the message. So I'm delivering it down from on high. And so I will call these UC prompts, even though if you look up the word essay, it does say a short piece of writing. But that notwithstanding, here is a presentation on the UC prompts. I have Laura Young listed in here. She's works at UCLA. She helped me present on this. She's not pictured here, meaning she won't be presenting today, but she helped me put this together. So I wanted to give her a shout out. So, opening question, what is your superpower? I love starting with this question when I'm working with students in workshops or in one-on-one settings. And I'm asking you, counselors who are on this call, and anybody listening, what is your superpower? One of my superpowers is, I would say, this is what's coming up for me this morning, adapting to change. I would think that in my life, based on having moved around 20 times, having just had a lot of different things thrown at me in my life, I think I'm pretty adaptable at this point. Nothing really, really ruffles me. And I would say another superpower that I have is, I would say taking, this is a really funny specific one, but taking stuff that's out there in the world and applying it to college essays. I'm working on a blog post this week about how America's Got Talent can teach you about college essays. So that's a really weird specific superpower. But if we were live in person, I would ask, what are some of your superpowers? Some people say listening. Some people say, reading people, reading their body language, feeling what other people are feeling is considered a superpower. I like it as a question because I think that it's a better way of asking how do you demonstrate leadership, or what makes you stand out? Both of which are UC prompts, one, actually 8 and 1, which we'll get to in just a minute. But I think superpower is a more fun way at getting at some of these otherwise dry, essay prompts. Sorry, not essay prompts, just prompts. Quick facts on me. I've gotten a degree at Northwestern and Irvine, both in theater-related things, a couple certificates in counseling, one in college counseling, one in kind of therapeutic counseling, we'll call it. I love MBTI. I'm a geek for it. And I love social media. I spend a lot of time thinking about how to share resources. And if you Google college essay guy, you'll find out more about me. So, and I'm a dad. This is me. This is my daughter Zola. We were on a date yesterday to a cafe nearby, and this picture totally lights me up. And I joke that every presentation is an opportunity to show the latest Zola picture. So this is the one from yesterday. So I'm a dad as well. Okay, let's get right into it. So in March 2016, just a few months ago, the UC prompts changed, and a lot of people were wondering, well, why did they change? So according to the UC directors, too many students were being too indirect in their statements. You were getting the mom essay or the uncle essay or the grandma essay, and the typical response is, great, mom or grandma, they sound like amazing people, but they're not the ones, coming to college. So they restructured the prompts based on that. Also, they found like some of the responses, as I mentioned earlier, were too academic. So they wanted them to be more straightforward, was a word that was used by the UC directors a lot at WACAC. WACAC, by the way, is an acronym for the Western Association of College Admissions Counselors. Not everybody maybe knows that. It's sort of our regional NACAC. And they also reflect back to the 14 elements of comprehensive review. So some of you will know what that means. If you don't know what that means, the University of California system uses these 14 elements to evaluate applications. So you'll see these on the screen here, and no need to write these down or screenshot these. You can just Google 14 elements of comprehensive review UC system and you'll get these. But these, basically, each of the essay prompts, and there are 8 of them now, as opposed to 2 last year and for the 10 years previous, they all the questions relate to one or more of these different elements of what they're looking for. So that, to me, is kind of one of the big reasons. Another reason is, when you had the old UC prompt, describe the world you come from and how it's shaped your dreams and aspirations, a lot of times students were writing about things like leadership and creativity and talent or skills and, academic subjects, and similarly with the UC prompt 2, which was pretty open-ended, last year. Tell us about a personal quality, talent, accomplishment, contribution, or experience that's important to you. people used to write about leadership, creativity, talent, or skill. So, some of these different topics were common topics. So the sense was, well, why don't we just use those as topics? So when you look at those, if you simplify, to its bare essence, what makes the prompts different? The first prompt is about leadership. The second prompt is about creativity. The third one is, what is a talent or skill, that you've got. My thinking is, and this was kind of from Laura actually, is like, well, if people are writing about these things already, why not more precisely ask for these things? And also, I think, rather than students, wandering in some cases for 500, 600 words, it used to be that the essays were 1,000 combined words. So that was maybe 600 for one and 400 from another. And my sense, and this is sort of my intuitive sense, is that if a student was kind of speaking about something generally like an abstract quality and we're kind of wandering for 600 words, well, why not give them, shorter responses, meaning, let's give them a 350 word budget for each of these essays. So if they get it wrong, they're not going to be wrong for quite as long. So, we'll get more information. So, I'd say, again, this is just me speaking and not on behalf of the UCs, but what they're looking for is more information. How can we get more gems, more gold from each individual student? But when it comes down to it, just like New Mexico, it ain't new and it ain't Mexico. These prompts aren't actually new. When you think about the supplements that students have been writing for years and years, I'll just go back to those, they've been writing on leadership and creativity and significant challenges. These are topics that students will be writing about and have been writing about. So some of the questions that I'll talk about today: one, why do they change? Already talked about it. How can I identify my 4 UC topics? So I'll give some strategies that I'm using now with my students to help them identify their topics. How can I know if my topic is a good one? I'll give a few different ways of framing that and thinking about, if the topic is a solid topic, what does that even mean? How can I stand out? That's, to me, the most important part of this webinar. And what does a great sample look like? We'll look at 2 samples. And then we'll talk about anything else you want to discuss. 4 ways to find your 4 UC topics in about 4 minutes. So this is kind of the short version of this, but here are some resources that I'm using. And by the way, I'll email everyone a handout so you'll have this resource. But 4 ways that I've been a leader. So in thinking about leadership, and by the way, if you just Google the UC prompts, you'll see not only the prompts, but a really useful supplemental information that the UC system has handed out in terms of thinking about leadership. And I just turned that into a handout it's called the How Do I Lead exercise. So it asks students to look at 4 ways that they've been a leader in their school, home, or community. So some obvious possibilities include like holding a role, with an impressive title. Maybe you started something, a club or nonprofit. So that's kind of obvious, but there might be some less obvious ways, like being the key decision maker on a particular project. So rather than being the editor-in-chief of the paper, maybe you were the design layouts editor. Or maybe you had a student a few years ago helped draft the school's student constitution. Now, that requires some pretty high-level responsibility and decision-making power. And students may not often think of leadership in those ways, but for students who are really struggling and want to communicate that they have had leadership responsibilities, sometimes they think it has to be, an impressive title, and that's just not true. So here are some ways to think about that. Another exercise is the 4 ways I've been challenged exercise. One of the prompts asks, what's a challenge that you've overcome? And, there are sort of the typical ways that students think of, or when they compare themselves to students who are, have incredible challenges, like, a friend of a friend I heard lived homeless for a few years, or a few months. That's a real challenge. My challenges don't add up to that. They kind of get in this thinking of, they're not really thinking of their experiences of this being challenges. I've got a little list here of other ways that might be considered challenges. And again, I'll email this handout so you don't have to worry about writing these down right now. But, growing up in a single parent household can come with certain challenges. Having significant work hours in high school, particularly if you had to help with pay family bills. Sometimes lots of responsibility taking care of your younger brother or sister is considered a challenge, because sometimes that can mean fewer extracurricular activities or not having a ride to go to extracurricular activities. Oftentimes this comes up in conversation with students, but they don't really think about it as being a challenge. So I'm not saying that these are the things they have to write about, and this list is by no means prescriptive, but there are some things on this that can get students thinking about challenges in different ways. And there's that list, zooming in a little bit. Being, for example, unable to take specific classes at your school. There's a particular prompt that asks, what is a particular educational barrier that you've had to overcome? So those are some ideas. Exercise 3 is, I like this one, 4 ways that I'm a genius. And I'm coming from the perspective that everyone is a genius. And even though other people have debunked this notion of Howard Gardner's multiple intelligences, saying that these are not actually intelligences, I find that it's a useful way in terms of looking at preferences. So the exercise here is to read about these 4 intelligences, or if you want to call them preferences: visual spatial, bodily kinesthetic, musical, interpersonal, intrapersonal, and then students ranking themselves on a 1 to 7. What are you best at and what are you worst at? And what it kind of does is it has students acknowledging and affirming that there is something here that I'm really good at, and then choosing that. And then at the bottom, step 2 is to name a place in your life where you express your top 4 intelligences. And bonus points if you can connect it to a leadership example above. So one example would be like, I demonstrated interpersonal intelligence by leading our club meetings, or I demonstrated my logical mathematical intelligence by, handling the money at my job. I've got a student who's been working at an ice cream store over the summer, and I asked her, are you in charge of the money, the bookkeeping? And she's like, oh yeah, I got to make sure everything is to the penny. And I'm like, oh great, that's a cool example of leadership because you're demonstrating responsibility. So not that leadership is the be all end all, has to be there, but oftentimes qualities associated with leadership are really great to show in a college application, as you know. Another one, I'm big on this one, is 4 values that have fueled me. So an exercise, if you've ever heard me present, is helping students identify their core values. And if you just, there's a website there, but if you just Google values exercise, college essay guy, you'll get a list of these values. And I like to have students, pick their top 10 and then pick their top 5. And so just looking at values that students have expressed and experienced in their lives that are deeply important to them can be a great thing that can potentially serve as a common theme to weave their essays together. But I like to use this values exercise, and you'll find out more about this in a minute on the how to stand out section, as a way of differentiating the essay topics. So in other words, the students are going to have 4 essay topics, and then looking at, okay, if the first essay topic, let's say it's on leadership, demonstrates my ability to be organized, my ability to, my confidence, and my ability to be a self-starter, then let's make sure that the second essay isn't just demonstrating those same values. So maybe my second essay is demonstrating creativity, and it's demonstrating my ability to, I'm just looking at my values list here now for some ideas, my ability to, my commitment to personal growth. That's different from the first essay, right? So what I like to encourage students to do is to try and think of a few values that are different for each of their 4 topics, so that by the end of the, of the 4 prompts, that they're showing not just 3 or 4 values that are repeating. It could be that, some students' essays are just demonstrating hard work in all 4 essays. But if we look at their 3.9 GPA, we know that the student is, willing to work hard. So that might be redundant. So we're looking at, just as we say as the basic advice, how can the essay demonstrate something that's not demonstrated elsewhere in the application? And one really great way to do that is by using the values exercise as I call this the menu. I reference this a ton in my sessions with students. 4 more ways to find your topics. Again, if you've ever heard me present, you've probably heard about me talk about the essence objects exercise. There's also the everything I want colleges to know about me exercise, which is just basically a big list, a white piece of paper that will have, that basically students fill out everything they want colleges to know about them. And that can go anywhere. And I think it's a really good one to do with mom and dad or friends, because there may be things that, that you're forgetting or not thinking about. The 21 details exercise is similar to this, but it's a little bit different. And it's looking at really specific things that you think are interesting or particular to you. And then I think the most important way to find topics, and this is what I tend to start with, is just looking at the UC activities list. And if you're looking for tips on how to write the UC activities list, just Google that. In fact, you can Google any of these phrases to find these exercises online. And these are all free. They're all on my website. So how to write your UC activities list. Students are going to come up with somewhere between 10 and 25 activities. And that to me is the place that if I'm a UC reader, I'm looking to know more about, well, why do these things mean something to you? So if you think of the UC activities list as being the what, here's what I've done. I think the essays, in terms of demonstrating the values, are keyed into the why. Why have I spent time doing this? Or, what has it meant to me? So what has been the value of these activities in my life? So how do we know if it's a great topic? Here are some things that I consider when I'm helping a student look for a topic. So does the topic, number one, have elasticity? And I put a rubber band on here because I mean, is it a stretchy topic? Now, what do I mean by a stretchy topic? If the student chooses to write about, let's say, rowing, because the student is a rower, and when you get into conversation and it's really not a huge deal for them and they really don't have a lot to say about it, it's just something that they did for 1 year or a few months, and it really doesn't, here's the key, it doesn't connect to a lot of values, it may not be a great topic. But if you can take that rowing essay, if say the student's been doing it for a long time, I've been rowing since I was 9 years old, chances are they're going to have had a lot of experiences related to rowing that are going to be able to demonstrate a lot of different values, qualities, and insights, based on that topic. So if the topic, here, what do I mean by elasticity? Simply put, if the topic will help the student discuss several different values and, if possible, come up with several different insights, and by insight, I just mean, elements that are unexpected, and I'll get into that more in just a little bit. How do you come up with a good insight? But simply put, can I demonstrate core values and insights, or what I call so what moments, with my topic? And that goes, the reason the name of this webinar is, and for other essays, is because I think that goes for any topic. And this may be kind of something intuitive that you already know, but I like to think of it as is the umbrella big enough? Because I really think of a topic not as, what the student is writing about is not the topic. Like a rowing essay is not about rowing. It's, of course, the topic is always about the student, the writer. We're just using rowing as the way to get in, as kind of I've already called it an umbrella, but I like to call it like a lever that pries open the student and talks about all these different parts inside him or her. So elasticity is the first quality, but also variety. If rowing is just related to hard work and perseverance, it might be kind of a typical essay. It might seem like a lot of other sports, or any physical activity essay. So can I also talk about creativity, or how did rowing help me develop autonomy? So in terms of those values, not just values that are kind of in the same category, physical challenge, hard work, perseverance, but also a variety of values. Can I jump around and talk about could there be a connection between rowing and my painting? This other thing that I do. So again, is that stretching far enough to talk about a lot of different parts of the student? And then sort of the basic one is, we have to make sure that we're not leaving money on the table. So looking at that extracurricular activities list, here's an example. Founder and president of Model United Nations, intern at the LA Superior Court, research assistant, Indian classical and Bollywood dancer, strings orchestra. Now, there are a lot of great topics to choose from here, but I would be curious, if I were a UC reader, to know about what it was like being founder and president of Model UN. So if she chose to not write about that, sometimes students will think, well, that's kind of obvious. But it's not obvious. Just reading, I organize meetings, coach students for conferences, raise money and awareness, awarded outstanding delegate at every conference attended. So that's some great information, but I don't really yet understand the why, the beating heart behind, what was motivating the student to do Model UN. So for students who think it's obvious, it's because they've spent a lot of time doing it. The reader has just been introduced to the notion of this student participating in Model UN. So don't leave money on the table. In other words, if there's something that seems kind of obvious to write about, maybe consider writing about it. That's me giving a qualified version of you should definitely write about it. I'm never going to tell somebody you should definitely write about something, but I will say you should strongly consider writing about it. Okay, so how do I stand out on these UC prompts? So now we're moving from what do I write about, in terms of the content, which topics do I choose, to how do I structure it? And I'll just acknowledge that we haven't really delved into, if you were watching this and you're a student, you probably won't have figured out your topics just yet, but I've given you some good places to look at it. And in terms, now we're moving into, so you might want to pause it if you're helping a student do this and you're watching this recorded. But now we're moving into how do I structure it? So once you've got the topics, how do we stand out? If you've heard me present before, you've heard me talk about narrative and montage structure. Just briefly, what are those? Narrative structure links events in a causal way. So A led to B led to C. And I think it's particularly good for addressing challenges. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Well, if a student underwent the challenge of, let's think, a student that I'm working with now, she couldn't take AP Chinese. So that was a challenge that she faced. The simple structure for her essay might be, here's the challenge, part one. Part two, what did I do about it? How did I work to overcome it? And part three, what did I learn? So that's a simple 1, 2, 3-part structure that works really well for these UC prompts. And by that, I mean any, short answer prompts. The 150-word extracurricular essays that, are written for many highly selective schools. What extracurricular activity have you been a part of? If you overcame a challenge and you're trying to figure out, how do I encapsulate this in just 150 words or 350 words in this case, just go, what was the challenge? What did I do about it? What did I learn? That's a simple, straightforward way. That's also going to work for main essays. There's a more complex version of that if you Google narrative structure college essay guide that will bring it more to life a little bit more. But in this short version, we don't really have time for that. So that's why I'm offering this sort of 1, 2, 3. Montage structure essentially is if you're not telling a story in which the events are causally linked, you're doing a montage. And a montage is jumping around in space and time. So here's this thing about me. Here's this other thing about me. Here's this third thing about me. But guess what? There's even this cool fourth thing about me. But in order for them to all connect and not seem random, we need to connect them with something. And so that's why I say montage essays are linked thematically. So there's a common thread. It could be, all of these connect to soccer. This is why soccer is life. Or my student a few years ago who wrote an essay called the Cupcake Essay. And it was like 24 elements of her life that were all connected to cupcakes. And what was cool about that is at the end of her essay, she's like, I also especially like it because it's not just one big blob of a cake. It's 24 different, individual experiences, just like the 24 details in this essay. So she basically bakes a batch of cupcakes for the reader. So that was a cool, happy accident that she kind of walked into. But it gives it that feeling of roundness. So we need something that gives it that feeling of roundness. Now, here's an advanced technique that I think is really important to give the essay a sense of completion at the end. If you have kind of a common tying theme that's mentioned at the beginning, like soccer has made a big impact on my life, if that's the only theme that's tying them all together, it might feel a little bit like, at the end. If you can come up with some other quality that ties them all together at the end of the essay, that's kind of like secretly buried and not drawn, not a lot of attention is drawn to it in the essay, then that can give it a really satisfying aha ending. An example of that, if you Google 5 families essay, has an essay where a student is like, I lived with 5 families and each of them taught me a lot of things. So he talks about the 5 families in 5 different paragraphs. But then at the end, he's got a quality that connects all of the things that he's been talking about so far. And then he's got like a bonus quality that connects them in an even deeper way. So that's a really cool way of sort of having the essay feel like feeling of it's gelling together. The theme can be revealed at the beginning, as I just said, like soccer is life. And then here, or everything I ever learned about life, I've learned through bees, and so it could be like the bee essay. That sounds like I'm saying BS essay. I'm not. The bee essay. And then having another theme at the end of it that connects it in a deeper way can be really satisfying. Again, I just want to emphasize, you don't have to have 2 or 3 themes that tie it together. You could just have, here are some interesting things about my life. How do these all connect? Here's the thing at the end that connects them all. And I think this is particularly good for extracurricular topics. So here are the personal insight questions. And, here are my thoughts on whether narrative or montage would work for each of these. The first thing I want to say is, of course, you could do a narrative or montage for any of these prompts, but here's sort of my intuitive sense of what might work a little bit better. And if we had more time and we were, live together, we could kind of discuss, could narrative or montage work? And the answer is, of course, yes, it could. But here's sort of my sense of what might work better and why. Describe an example of your leadership experience in which you've positively influenced others, helped resolve disputes, or contributed to group efforts over time. So this is a leadership essay. Narrative or montage, I think either could work here. Narrative would be, I never knew the first day that I took the job as senior class vice president, I never knew what I was getting into. And here's a series of things that happened to me that are connect causally. This happened, and then not only that, but then this other disaster happened, and that led to this other disaster, but here's how I worked my way out of it. So that could be a potential, here's the challenge I faced, this disaster as senior VP, or senior class VP. Here's what I did about it, and here's what I learned. But it could also be a montage. To me, leadership has meant, more than just leading meetings and giving speeches. Being senior class vice president is about paying attention to the little things. So it could be a little montage of like how leadership is shown in the little details, the little in-between moments. So again, that can be clearly set up at the beginning, or you can sort of say, just sort of jump in. As senior class VP, I have many different jobs, and it could be like, here are the big ones, but I have smaller jobs too. And then the realization or the insight at the end could be, what I've learned about leadership is that it's not necessarily the big things, even though those are important, but it's also about paying attention to the little moments. And so that could be kind of an insight that's saved for the end, kind of the bookend. For the second prompt, every person has a creative side and it can be expressed in many different ways: problem solving, original and innovative thinking, and artistically, to name a few. This could be a narrative essay. Here's a problem that I had to solve creatively. But I think this could be a really cool montage essay. So if you've got a creative side, like let's say, you love to paint, I'd love to hear about what painting has taught you about all different parts of your life. I would be less interested in how you learned how to paint. I don't know if that would really demonstrate core values. It might, but that might be, sometimes students kind of rely on the narrative to fill up words, when I really don't think that that's where you're scoring points. And by scoring points on these applications, I mean, are you demonstrating core values and insight into who you are? For the third one, so in other words, for the second one, I kind of prefer montage, but that's just my personal preference. What would you say is your greatest talent or skill? For this one, again, I think this is kind of a montage essay. I had a student a few years ago who wrote a great juggling essay that's about how juggling taught him about math, and he connected juggling to connecting with others. But really juggling was, I forget what his third thing was, but juggling was connected to all these different cool things. And again, juggling is not the main part of the essay. That's sort of background. Juggling is just the framework for talking about all these cool parts of himself: his ability to connect with others, his obsession with math, and why he's good at it and how it connects to juggling. So really, these are all just, opportunities to make connections, interesting connections. Number 4, how have you taken advantage of a significant educational opportunity or worked to overcome an educational barrier? For me, it's a challenges essay, and this is a narrative one. It's sort of like, what was the opportunity? What did you do about it? What did you learn? Or what was the challenge? What did you do about it? And what did you learn? Now, I've repeated that 3 or 4 times, so that may seem like that's the only way to write a challenges essay. It's certainly not. That's just one way to write it. But it can be a simple structure when someone is like struggling to find out how to structure the essay. Describe the most significant challenge you faced. And again, I think this is a narrative one. As soon as I see the word challenge, I'm like, okay, what was the challenge? And then, it kind of leads you to that. What did you do to overcome it? And what did you learn? In this case, they're asking specifically, has it affected your academic achievement? And they're giving an opportunity here to talk about, why you got that C in physics, in 10th grade, for example. So this to me is a narrative. Could it be a montage? Maybe. It's the most significant challenge to me seems like it's focusing on one thing. So that would want to be the focus of the essay. If there were several challenges, could it be that it's jumping around? Of course. But for me, this is, I think, leaning on a more narrative focus would be useful here. Your favorite academic subject, to me, this is kind of like the creative essay. I'd love to jump around or see a student jump around with what are all the things you've learned through history, as opposed to like, how did history become your favorite subject? A narrative. Or maybe this starts as a narrative where it's like, I used to hate physics, and it's sort of like, but then this happened and I started to love physics. But then at some point, I think we need to get all the influences on you, and that's going to jump around, in space and time. And here are all the ways that physics has influenced me. So it might be start off as a narrative and then kind of become a montage. What have you done to make your school or community a better place? This could go either way for me. Narrative, we had this problem, we needed to raise money for this particular thing. And so here's what we did about it. And here's the impact it had. I think it's really important for these, volunteering or community essays to emphasize impact and specific impact at the end of the essay. If it's emphasized, if it's already clear in your activities list, you may not need to repeat it. It could be more about what was the impact in a more, in a soft sense, in a more intangible sense. So you might not be able to fit into your activities list. Like maybe you fit in that we raised $4,000 for this particular thing to buy these particular, tools or resources, but you may not be able to fit in there about the impact that it had on your school community. So could it be that you noticed people were kinder to one another after this event? And if so, give some evidence of how the vibe or how the school energy shifted. What's one thing that you think sets you apart from other candidates applying to the University of California? To me, this is kind of the topic of your choice from the Common App. Anything that you can't think of or doesn't apply to these other prompts, what else you got? I think that goes there. And that could be narrative or montage. Okay, so here are 2 ways to stand out on the UC prompts. And we're going to do a little exercise. And first involves making uncommon connections. And this is through a little game. And again, I'll send you a little handout that kind of spells this out. But here's the game we're going to play. I call this the UC game. And the UC obviously has a double meaning here. It stands for University of California, but it stands for uncommon connections. Because to me, that's the key for standing out on an extracurricular essay. And so in order to play this game, what I need you to think about as you're listening to this, I need you to think about an extracurricular activity, because one of your writing responses will probably be on one that you would probably write about. And so that's what I would say to students. If I'm talking to counselors, think of an extracurricular activity that is kind of a cliche topic, because that's going to be more satisfying with this exercise. So think of one really quick. Maybe it's soccer or the mission trip essay or, violin. These are things that a lot of students write about. So let's pick the first one I mentioned, soccer. Now, here's how to play this game. And you can play this in groups of students. You could do this with a whole workshop. It's kind of fun. It engages the whole room in a really cool way. You could play it one-on-one with a student, or you can just tell the student how to play it and have them play it on their own. I find that that's most useful, because this will be an exercise that's useful for them in all of their writing. So I'm going to teach you how to do it. I want you to kind of do it on your own, and then hopefully you'll be able to teach somebody else how to do it. So let's take soccer just as an example. And I want you to think for a second. Let's brainstorm based on that values exercise. What are some common values that people would connect to soccer? And if you want to Google values exercise college essay guy, you can see that some examples of values, but you can probably come up with them on your own. Most soccer essays are going to be about what? Hard work, discipline, teamwork, pushing that extra mile. These are the kind of the cliche. So first part of this game is we're brainstorming the cliche connections that would be made in most soccer essays. One way that I've said this before to students is I want you to think about what would other soccer essays focus on. Okay. And I want you to write those things down. So a student writes down 3 to 5 of these cliche values. Okay. So let's say that we've done that. And then I want to say, and I sort of make this agreement with the student. I say, okay, would you agree to not write about those things? And there's a moment of like, okay, but a kind of like a little freak out moment of like, oh, then what am I going to write about? And so the question then becomes, well, what do we write about instead? That's when we begin to make some uncommon connections. So if you take a look at that values exercise, and again, I'll email it as a PDF. So what are some uncommon connections, some things that we wouldn't normally connect with soccer? And if we were in a workshop setting, I would just give a few seconds and then hands would start to go up. What would be some unusual soccer connections? So let's say someone raises their hand and says, teamwork. And I go, okay, well, let me try and guess it. Do you mean like, by playing with others, you're learning, or let's say they say collaboration, which is a little bit, variation on teamwork. And I say, okay, let me try and guess it. Are you saying that you have to learn to collaborate with other players and you can't just focus on yourself because then the team isn't really led to victory and they're kind of nodding and you go, okay, I guessed it, so it's not a great one. Let's come up with another one. So you keep going in this game until someone comes up with something unusual. So let's say a student raises their hand, or you're sitting with a student one-on-one and they go, soccer and, let's say, I'm just trying to make something up off the top of my head that's a little bit unusual. Calm. Okay, cool. So soccer and calm. So I'm not seeing a direct connection. How does soccer teach you about calm? And I'm just drawing on my own basketball experience right now. And I think about when I am really, really calm, sort of my zen is shooting baskets at the free throw line and focusing on the technique of keeping my elbow in, bending my knees, snapping my wrist so that I make sure that it has, backspin. Now I'm saying this about basketball, but certainly this could apply to soccer in terms of the, making sure your posture is right, making sure you're balanced. Focusing on these sort of internal things oftentimes can have the result of scoring the goal, making the basket. But it's really, now here's the insight, it's really what I found is focusing on the internal stuff, focusing on the parts of me that, as my technique right, as my form right, will ultimately, in a sort of Zen in the art of archery way, have the result of success, but I'm not focused on success itself. I'm focused on the process. So if a student were to say that, you'd be like, great, awesome, write about it. I'm just kind of, making that up based on ideas that I've had before. But what we're looking for is a moment when a student comes up with that sort of unusual connection, because that's what's going to give us the fodder for not necessarily a whole essay, but a whole paragraph. Because what my challenge when I'm working with students is to come up with 3 or 4 of these unusual connections. And that will give us enough content for the essay. So Let me give a sample essay here. Let me just bring this up really quick. Excuse me. I should have had this ready, but it'll just take me a second. Here we go. Here's the handout that I will send you. Oops. Okay, here we go. Let me scroll down on this. And if for some reason you can't read this, Cindy, please let me know, but it should be good. Okay. Values list. Okay, here we go. The Santur essay. And I apologize, the print's going to be kind of small, but hopefully you'll be able to read it. Actually, you probably can't read this right now. Let me just change the sharing. Sorry about that. New share. I'm going to share this document. Cool. Here we go. Great. So you should be able to see this. This is the Santur essay. And this is written using the montage structure a few years ago. And it just happened to be something that the student shortened for another application. But as I was looking for examples of UC potential responses, I saw that this could have worked for prompts 2, 3, 7, 8, and even 1. So here's the essay. I'm just going to read it. It'll take me just 2 minutes. And we'll look at, and what I want you to look for is what are these uncommon values, these uncommon connections. So here's the essay. Do, re, fa, mi, re, do, sol, fa, mi, re. Have I completely lost it? Should I be locked up at a mental hospital, chained to a chair? No. Then what are these utterances coming from my mouth? Music. I've devoted thousands of hours of my life to playing the santur, a classical Persian instrument that originated in the Middle East. Some people think I'm strange, a Persian red-headed Jewish teenager obsessed with an ancient musical instrument. But they don't see what I see. My santur is King David's lyre. It can soothe, enrapture, mesmerize. The santur also allows me to connect to my culture and Persian heritage and to visit Iran of the past, a culture rich in artistic tradition. Sometimes I imagine performing for the king in the hanging gardens of Babylon, the santur sounds echoing through the 7 hills of Jerusalem. Today, some Americans view Iran as a land of terrorists, but when I play, the innocent of Iran, the educated, the artists, the innovators come to life. Iran is not a country of savages. It's Kublai Khan's fountain, an abundant source of knowledge and creativity. Finally, the santur represents one of my remaining links to my grandfather. In the last few years of his life, Baba Jun didn't know me as his grandson. Alzheimer's slowly took over his brain, and eventually he couldn't recognize me. Baba Jun grew up with the music of the santur, and my father plays it in his car every day. So when I play, the music connects all 3 generations. In December, I'll be releasing my first album, a collection of classical Persian pieces. Proceeds from the album will go toward Alzheimer's research, as I hope to play some small part in finding a cure for the disease. My teacher is one of only a handful of santur teachers from Iran, and I sometimes wonder if the santur will soon become extinct, like the 7,000 endangered languages, which may soon be gone. Not if I have anything to say about it. So, really lovely essay. And I just want to point out a few things about it. What are the unusual connections? Now, again, the common connections for a typical musical instrument essay might be hard work, discipline, perseverance, etc. But this student is making some uncommon connections. So here's this connection to culture. Today, some Americans view Iran as a land of terrorists, but when I play, the educated, the artists, the innovators. So it's a tool here, music, in this case, the santur, is a tool for social change. And then connection to family and a different kind of social change in the last paragraph by raising money for Alzheimer's research. And then here's this insight, this unexpected thing at the end. He's saying that he connects it to music, this santur music being like an endangered language. But he's saying, I'm committed to making sure that it doesn't die out completely. Really lovely. This to me is a standout essay, and I want to say why. So let me switch back to the other screen. To me, this is a standout essay because in a common essay, this is to say a boring essay, a boring response, you'll have a common topic, like let's say soccer, common connections. Soccer has taught me hard work, perseverance, and the value of working with others, and common language. That is why I love soccer. But to me, a standout response is going to have an uncommon topic. For example, the santur. An uncommon connection. Santur has taught me, how, the power of social change, the power of connection to family, culture, and uncommon language. I love that line about the santur sounds echoing through the 7 hills of Jerusalem. Okay. Now, I know what you're thinking, probably. You're thinking, well, not everybody has an uncommon topic. Not everybody's played the santur, or else it wouldn't be uncommon. And also, you're probably thinking, well, not every student can do uncommon language. Not every student is a writer. And what I want to say is, it's okay. That if you're going to focus on one of these three things, I think the most important place to focus on is the uncommon connections. And in fact, the more common the topic, let's say the more soccer or basketball your essay is, the more you're going to need to come up with uncommon connections. You could even think of that as a reciprocal relationship. If it's more soccer, more common, then the connections need to be even more uncommon to stand out from all the other soccer and basketball essays. Uncommon language for me is kind of bonus territory. That's not what I think readers are really looking for, all of them necessarily. That's kind of like, if you can say it in a pretty way, great. By the way, I'll say that this student who wrote this essay didn't consider himself a writer. Instead, he just spent a lot of time revising and thinking about it, because to get to that uncommon language, he had to really think, yeah, certainly he had to have some writing talent, but he had to just work hard. So I'd say uncommon language comes from working hard, even more than writing talent. Okay, the second way to stand out, and I'm just going to do the brief version of this, but I'll share with you a resource where you can hear a little bit longer version of this exercise, because I think it's really my favorite exercise right now that I've got, is by getting like deep on your essay. And how do you get like deep? It's through an exercise that I call the feelings and needs exercise. And so you'll find a version of this. If you just Google feelings and needs exercise, college essay guy, you'll have a 12-minute video. And then underneath that video, you'll have a PDF that has this exercise. But let me just walk you through it briefly. And I'm not going to make you do it now. If we were in a workshop, I would definitely make you do it, because I think it's really, really useful. And it's especially useful for helping students come up with how to take a challenges essay and really add depth. So let me just share my screen. I'm just going to switch over to that other document. And how this works, let me just find it really quick. Oh, it's at the top. Okay, so how this feelings and needs exercise works is that it involves, really, you can just do this with a blank sheet of paper. Sorry, it's at the top. You take a blank sheet of paper and you ask yourself, actually, this may confuse you. So I'm not actually I'm gonna pull this handout down, because, I can do it based on this. You basically fill in what was an experience you had, and it could be a challenge. And one way to do it is to just use this handout. When I saw or heard experienced blank, and so the challenge might be my parents' divorce, I felt, and you can write down, what were the feelings you felt. And it's sometimes really difficult to come up with feelings. Actually, you know what? I'm finding that I actually want to lead you through this exercise, or at least I want to show you how I lead students through this. Because I think that if I don't do that, I'll feel later like, oh man, I should have led them through that exercise. So let me flip back to the Prezi. This is me being adaptable to my own whims, if anything. So here's how this exercise works. So you can just delete the last 30 seconds in your mind. Okay, so the feelings and needs exercise involves taking out a blank sheet of paper, and you don't have to do this now unless you want to go back and do this later, turning it sideways, so horizontally or landscape view, and in the top left corner, writing the word challenges. So the challenges might be, I lost somebody, or I had a particular move that was really difficult, or I just came to this country a few years ago, or I was incredibly shy, so there could be many different challenges. So that would be in the first column. I would just ask a student to write down a few challenges, and it could be 3 challenges, 4 challenges, etc. In the next column, next to challenges, I would have a student write down, what were the effects of this challenge on your life? So in this column, it might be like, okay, if my challenge was divorce, what were the effects of that on my life? So my parents were divorced, and the effects, and I'm not asking here for feelings yet. We'll get to that in just a minute. What I'm looking for is what makes divorce different from me than from any other student who might be writing about divorce. So for me, divorce didn't lead to fighting and screaming, arguing. It really was a quiet thing. Divorce led to me, so the effects were mom moved out of the house. It was quieter around the house. We had multiple holidays. We had to have 2 Thanksgivings. A lot of the support for financially was, my parents were missionaries, and they were, a lot of the churches who were supporting us dropped us when they heard about the divorce. So financially, things were a little bit tighter. Those are some effects. So I would just write down, mom moved out, 2 Thanksgivings, and what would I write about? Financial difficulties. I might write back, we did some more bargain shopping than we'd ever done before. We didn't go out to eat. So not going out to eat would be another effect. So that's the effects column. In the third column, we would write feelings. And for this, we can use that feelings and needs exercise that you'll receive. And again, you can just Google it. But I want students to, for each one of these effects, to write down different feelings that came about as a result. So based on us not having lots of money, how did I feel about that? I felt sometimes sad, sometimes, a little disappointed that I couldn't, go out and do all the things that my friends were doing. Or, mom moved out. My brothers had to move back and forth. They split the week. So I would write that in the effects column. Brothers moved back and forth throughout the week. How did I feel about that? A little bit annoyed. And I was also kind of confused because I didn't really know why they were getting divorced. So I might write down disappointed, confused, and annoyed. So that's in the feelings column. This is the third column. In the fourth column, I would write down the word needs at the top. And this is from nonviolent communication. Based on each of the feelings that you felt, based on the effects of the challenges, what were your needs underlying each of those feelings? So I know that I'm going really fast on this. And if you watch the video, there's a slower version, but I want to leave time for questions and answers. With the needs, you can think about for each of the feelings, and you can look at your needs list, which is next to the feelings list. Based on me feeling annoyed, what was my need? Well, if I was feeling annoyed, that's kind of like low-level anger. So I probably needed to talk about it. So what was my need? My need was for expression, for communication, for transparency. So I might write down those things. I was also confused. I didn't know why they got divorced. So what did I need? I needed to know more. I needed more honesty, maybe, from my parents. What's another one that I mentioned? One of the effects it had was money. And I felt, based on that, I felt disappointed. What did I need? I needed more autonomy. I needed more, I wanted to be more independent, more free, but I felt hampered by, my, some of the financial difficulties. So we're at the fourth column. So just to recap, we've talked about the challenges, the effects of those challenges, the feelings we felt as a result, the needs we had that weren't getting met. And by the way, if there are positive feelings, because sometimes there are, I think it's important to acknowledge that. And the needs will then, in that case, be positive. Like what needs were getting met. So like maybe also during that time, because mom wasn't around, maybe I had more free time. This isn't true for me because my dad was more the disciplinarian than my mom. But, maybe I had more, I could stay out later. And therefore, in the needs column, I might put my need for autonomy was met in this case. So anyway, you kind of see where I'm going with that. In the next column, so after the needs column, we've got what did I do about it? That's what I would have student write at the top of the paper. So what did I do in order to get those needs met? Now at this point, a student is probably going, well, I didn't actually literally do anything to meet my needs because I wasn't really aware of my needs at the time, probably, unless the student was in counseling, like high-level counseling and therapy. So the question is, well, what do I do to get my needs met generally? And I think that's a good starting question, but it's still kind of ambiguous. So what I tell students is, guys, this is your extracurricular activities column. So in here, just put in some stuff that you do for fun. And students might think that's kind of random, but check this out. When I was in high school, I didn't actually do anything to get my needs met. I didn't go to therapy. I just was trying to get good grades. And I decided to join theater, because I loved theater. Or actually, I didn't decide to join. I continued my involvement in theater. In fact, I delved in even more deeply. I switched schools so that I could get more involved in theater. Now, when I think back about, so I write down theater in the what did I do about it column. When I think back about what needs that met for me, so I'm thinking about my needs column, my need for transparency, my need for honesty, my need for communication and self-expression, my need for autonomy, all of those were fully met by theater. In fact, I'd found my family in theater. So I might go backwards and say, okay, what I was searching for after my parents' divorce was a family, somebody that I could connect with. Another feeling that I had was emotional detachment. What was my need? For connection, for intimacy, something that was deeply met. So sometimes by putting the activity in the column, you can kind of think about, okay, well, what was I lacking? You can think of, well, what positive thing did this bring me in the fifth column? Well, we would need to set up earlier in the essay that this thing was lacking. Now, you might think that's a lot to do in 350 words. This is a great exercise, especially for the Common App main essay. And I think it then can be shortened for the prompt 5 challenges essay. So there's prompt. There's a good tip. And I like to work backwards from doing the main essay first and then, doing a shorter version of it because I think it's easier to cut than it is to expand. So anyway, once you fill in, here are some of the things I did. Theater, I played basketball. I, started running cross country. What were all the things that I did? Last column, what did I learn? / what values did I develop? Or this is where the superpowers come into play. So beyond the things that theater taught me in terms of the needs that it met, what bonus things did I learn? Did I come to value that I get to experience and express. Like creativity. I really got to experience and express my creativity in new ways. I got to travel. I won this free trip to New York to perform on Broadway. And so I got to experience, the culture of New York. So those are kind of like the bonus values that can kind of expand. Now, for some students, they're still going to be in process and they're like, I haven't done anything yet. Well, that what did I do column can turn into what could I do column. Because especially if students have some time before their applications due, 3 months, 6 months, there's time to go out and do the things to help, learn the lessons and to help, develop the insights and to meet those needs that haven't been getting met. So that's another way of thinking about this. Okay, let me make sure that I am sharing the feelings and needs, which is cool. Okay, so that's kind of the quick version of this. Let me show you how this makes it into an essay. And we don't have a ton of time, so I'm gonna read it. I'm gonna read it, but kind of fast. So here is the other essay. This is called the Breaking Up with Mom essay. Whoops. And this is the UC version. So this was a student who, and I'll also send you the longer version of this. This was a student who wrote a longer Common App essay. And I said, hey, could you shorten this to 350 words and make it a UC version? And she said, sure. So you'll get both, but this is kind of the short version. When I was 15 years old, I broke up with my mother. We could still be friends, I told her, but I needed my space and she couldn't give me that. She and I both knew that I was the only person she had in America. Her family was in Russia. She only spoke to her estranged ex-husband in court. Her oldest son avoided her at all costs. And yet, at 15 years old, I wasn't equipped to effectively calm her down from her nightly anxiety attacks. At 43, she wasn't willing to believe that I did love her, but that I couldn't be responsible for stabilizing her life. Moving in with my dad full-time. So she's begun with the inciting incident. Here's the thing I did. I broke up with mom. How did that affect her? Moving in with my dad full-time felt like I was abandoning her after tying a noose around her neck. But as my drama teacher and guardian angel pointed out, my mother wasn't going to get better if I kept enabling her, and that I wasn't going to be able to grow if I was constrained by her dependence on me. For the first time, I'd taken action. I was never again going to passively let life happen to me. So this essay, the challenge was mom and I were dependent on one another. There was maybe like a codependency going on. So what did she do about it? She breaks up with her. So she's put the what did I do about it at the front of the essay. So just to reiterate my point earlier, you don't have to do it in the order of here was the challenge, here's what I did about it, here's what I learned. You could say, here's what I did about it, and then flash back to, here's why I did that. Here's what else she did about it. She says, during 4 long months of separation, I filled the space that my mom previously dominated with learning, everything and anything. I taught myself French through online programs, built websites, and began editing my drawings on Photoshop to sell them online. When my dad lost his 3rd job in 5 years, I learned how to sew my own clothes and applied my new knowledge to costume design in the drama department. On stage, I learned to empathize. Backstage, I worked with teams of dedicated and mutually supportive students. In our improv group, I gained the confidence to act on my instincts. With the help of my drama teacher, I learned to humble myself enough to ask for help. So this is what I learned about it and what I gained. So you can kind of see, here was the challenge I went through. What did I do about it? How did I meet those needs? And then what did I learn? This is that column in this paragraph. On my 16th birthday, I picked up the phone and dialed my mom. I waited through 3 agonizing and long pauses between rings. Katyush, hi mom, it's me. So to me, this essay has a different impact when you look at the Common App version. But the point of illustrating this is to say, here's an essay that came out of that exercise that I just described to you. So let me flip back to the other screen. Okay. So after the Breaking Up with Mom essay, one thing that I'll say, and a main difference that I predict between the UC personal insight questions and the Common App personal statement is that whereas the personal insight questions, the UCs are going to be more focused on information, like just give us the facts, we're reading fast. I think there's more room in the Common App personal statement for poetry. And by that, I mean craft or uncommon language. So, I have a webinar coming up on July 7th. Is that tomorrow? Yeah, it is tomorrow, on the 4 values of what I think are, make a great college essay. Here are 2 of them, but I'll tell you what they all 4 are, and you can sign up for the webinar on my site if you want. But the core values are, I think, most important for a UC essay. Give me a sense of what you would fight for. What do you really represent? And that, to me, for a UC prompt is more important than craft, even though I think craft is one of the essentials. So just to highlight what the 4 qualities are: core values, insight or so what moments, vulnerability, and craft. I think vulnerability and craft are especially important on the Common App main statement. I think core values and insight are more important on the UC statement, just to put a generally speaking on it. Okay, coming up to time. So if you'd like more resources, if you maybe have been to my site, but you can go to collegeessayguy.com. I've got a ton of free resources. Click on the free stuff page. That's a pretty popular one. Coming up in just a few days, starting on Sunday, actually, I have it's called How to Write the Personal Statement. This is a week-long course that's for counselors and for students. Students will write their personal statement in 1 week. Counselors will get all the resources they need in order to help a student write a personal statement. It's basically my entire book, but shrunk down into 1 week of interactive exercises. There's a rare opportunity here to get with another counselor and to write your own personal statement, which can be really fun and interesting and affirming. And that's July 10th to the 17th, 5 to 6:30 p.m. PST. If you can't make those times, or you can't make some or all of those times, sign up anyway. You'll get a recording of it so you can watch it on your own time whenever you want, forever and ever. Another course that I have coming up is how to write the UC prompts. And I know it should say prompts there instead of essays, but basically it's going to be a 4-day version. It's going to go really in depth with each prompt. I'm going to have sample essays, and it's going to be awesome. In order to sign up for that, you can check out this link right here, and I hope to see some of you there. Thanks so much. That's my time, and hope to connect with you soon. Bye-bye.